If you've ever looked at your savings account and felt nothing, no relief, no safety, just another number waiting to become a bigger number, this story is for you. Because somewhere out there is a man who had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and he still couldn't make himself stop. Today I want to tell you about a merchant who was asked at the end of his life a question almost no one dares to answer honestly. His reply was 7 words long. Those 7 words undid 40 years of work in a single breath. But to understand why, you need to know what he built and what it cost him to build it. Before we go there, tell me in the comments, if you had enough money today, right now, to stop worrying forever, would you actually stop? Sit with that question. You might find the answer isn't as simple as you think. There was a merchant named Baltazar who lived in a river town where the boats came in loaded with salt, cloth, and rumor. He had started with nothing but a cart and a good pair of hands, and by the time he was 40, his name was on more doors than any other man's in the province. Granaries, a fleet of barges, a house with 3 courtyards, and a fountain that ran even in the dry season, which in that town was its own kind of boasting. The town itself smelled of river mud and cut cedar, and in the mornings the docks rang with the shouts of porters unloading crates that would later carry Baltazar's mark burned into the wood. Children in the market learned his name before they learned their letters, the way children learn the names of storms. He was, by every visible measure, the proof that hard work redeems a hard childhood. Old women blessed him in the street. Young men asked to apprentice under him, hoping some of his fortune might rub off through proximity alone. People said Baltazar had a gift. What he had, more precisely, was a wound that looked like ambition. As a boy, he had watched his father go hungry twice in one winter, quietly, without complaint, rationing bread so his children wouldn't notice. Baltazar noticed. He was 7 years old, and he made a promise to himself in the dark of that cold house. He would never again feel the particular helplessness of not having enough. He didn't know, at 7, that a promise like that has no finish line. He only knew it as a fire in his chest, and for the next 50 years, he fed that fire everything he had. By 60, Baltazar owned more than his father could have imagined in 100 years. And still, some nights, he woke at 3 in the morning with his heart pounding, certain, though he could never explain it in daylight, that it was all about to be taken from him. He would walk to his study in the dark and go over his ledgers by lamplight, adding columns he had already added that afternoon, as if the numbers might have changed while he slept, as if enough repetition could finally produce the feeling he was chasing. It never did. The number always grew. The feeling never came. You may already recognize him. Maybe not the barges or the courtyards, but the 3 a.m. arithmetic. The checking of the account that already has enough in it. The promise made in a hard season of life that quietly became a life sentence. Those closest to him noticed small things that, taken alone, seemed harmless. He counted the candles before bed, though he could have bought every candle in the province without noticing the expense. He kept a second, private ledger that no accountant ever saw, recording not just profits, but every near loss, every contract that had almost failed, as if cataloging the disasters that hadn't happened could somehow prevent the ones that might. Baltazar's household staff had grown used to his habits. The early rising, the late ledgers, the way he flinched almost imperceptibly whenever anyone spoke of loss. What they didn't know was that Baltazar himself had started to suspect something was wrong, though he had no language for it yet. He simply felt, more and more, that the wealth he had built to protect himself had become the thing he was protecting himself from. It was in the 63rd year of his life that a wandering monk named Devarim came through the river town, as such travelers sometimes did, asking for nothing and offering conversation in exchange for a bowl of rice. Baltazar, more out of boredom than curiosity, invited the monk to dine at his house. He wanted, if he was honest, an audience, someone new to be impressed by the fountain that ran in the dry season. Devarim ate slowly, said little, and looked at the courtyards the way a man looks at weather, noticing but not moved. This unsettled Baltazar more than admiration would have. Near the end of the meal, almost carelessly, Devarim asked a question that Baltazar would remember for the rest of his life. "How much is enough?" Baltazar laughed, the easy laugh of a man used to being the smartest person in the room. A strange question from a man with an empty bowl. "Not so strange," said Devarim. "I know exactly how much is enough for me. It fits in this bowl. I was curious whether you know your number." But what Balthazar didn't know was that he had never once in 50 years allowed himself to actually answer that question. He had answers for everything else: interest rates, harvest yields, the going price of salt in 3 neighboring provinces. But never that one. Every time the question had surfaced in some quiet corner of his mind, he had drowned it in more work, more acquisition, more proof that he was safe. He tried to answer Devarim anyway, the way a merchant answers, with numbers. He named a sum. Then, uncomfortable with how it sounded out loud, he doubled it. Devarim only nodded, the way you nod at a child who is still learning to count. Not unkindly, but without agreement either. "You've already passed that number 4 times over," Devarim said, "by your own accounts. Remember this detail. It matters later." Balthazar changed the subject, as powerful men often do when a conversation gets too close to something they'd rather not examine. He asked about the monk's travels instead, and Devarim, gracious as ever, obliged him. But the question stayed in the room like smoke that wouldn't clear, and Balthazar found himself, for the rest of that evening, unable to look directly at his own fountain. The monk left the next morning. Balthazar told himself he had forgotten the conversation within a week. This was not true. He simply buried it, the way he had buried every uncomfortable question before it, under the familiar weight of work. And this is where everything changed, though slowly, the way a hull takes on water, not in a single dramatic flood, but in 100 small leaks that no one notices until the deck is already wet. Over the following 2 years, Balthazar's fortune grew larger still. He acquired 2 more granaries. He financed a bridge that the town named after him. By every outward measure, he was more secure than he had ever been. And yet the 3 a.m. waking grew worse, not better. He began to notice something that frightened him far more than any bad harvest ever had. The fear wasn't shrinking as the money grew. It was growing too, as if the two had been tied together on the same rope since he was 7 years old, and pulling one up only pulled the other higher. He started avoiding his own ledgers, not because he had lost interest in the numbers, but because he had begun to suspect, in the honest hours before dawn, that the numbers were never the actual problem. The suspicion terrified him more than any debt ever had. A bad season he knew how to fix. This he didn't. It was his own daughter, watching him decline a rare quiet evening with his grandchildren so he could review a contract that could easily have waited until morning, who finally said the thing no business partner had ever dared to say. "Father, you have more than we could spend in 3 generations. What are you still building toward?" He didn't have an answer. For the first time in his life, a question about money left him completely silent. And in that silence, something Devarim had said 2 years earlier surfaced, whole and unwelcome, like a stone the river finally gives back. "You've already passed that number 4 times over. By your own accounts." Balthazar sent for Devarim. It took his messengers 4 months to find him, in a small mountain village where the monk was, predictably, teaching children how to sit still and notice their own breathing. When Devarim finally returned to the river town, Balthazar was older, grayer, and, though he would never have used the word himself, frightened in a way his wealth had never protected him from. He asked Devarim to repeat the question, not as a courtesy this time, as a genuine plea. "How much is enough?" This time Balthazar did not reach for the ledgers. He sat with it. The silence stretched long enough that his own household staff, waiting outside the study, wondered if something was wrong. Balthazar felt, for the first time in 56 years, the actual shape of his fear. Not the fear of hunger, which he hadn't truly known since he was 7 years old, but the fear that if he ever stopped adding to the number, he would have to face the boy in the cold house directly, without the fortune standing between them. He looked at Devarim, and his voice, when it came, was smaller than he intended. "I don't know how to want anything else." Devarim set down his empty bowl. "Then that," he said, "is your actual number, not a sum, a sentence you've been serving without a verdict. 7 words." That was the whole reply when Balthazar later tried to repeat it to his daughter, though he told her it took him 2 more years to understand what it meant. Not a sum. A sentence you've been serving without a verdict. He understood finally that the fortune had never been the goal. It had been a wall, built brick by brick since he was 7 years old, meant to keep out a feeling, helplessness, that no amount of stone could actually reach because the feeling had never lived in the world outside him. It lived in a cold house, decades in the past, and no granary built today could warm that room. This is the part of the story where you might expect Balthazar to give everything away, to walk into the mountains with an empty bowl of his own. He didn't. That would have been just another number, a new extreme mistaken for wisdom. What he did instead was quieter and, in its way, harder. He named an actual figure, not doubled out of fear, not shrunk out of guilt, just honest. And he decided, out loud, in front of his family, that the figure was enough. He kept the barges. He kept the bridge with his name on it. He stopped, for the first time in his adult life, adding, "That merchant is you." Every time you refresh your account balance, hoping the number will finally make you feel safe, and it doesn't. And you tell yourself it will feel different once the number is bigger. It won't. Not because you don't deserve security. You do. But because the feeling you're chasing was never actually about the number. It was planted somewhere earlier. A hard winter, a frightened year. A moment when you learned that not enough feels like danger in your body, not just your bank account. And your nervous system has been trying to out-earn that memory ever since, using a currency memories don't accept. This is what the philosophers who study the mind call attachment, not to money itself, but to what we've decided money proves about us. Safety. Worth. The right to stop being afraid. Balthazar wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing a feeling he had assigned to wealth decades earlier, when he was too young to know the two weren't actually the same thing. Sufficiency isn't a threshold you cross. It's a decision you make deliberately, the way Balthazar finally made it at 65, not because the number was finally big enough, but because he was finally willing to stop asking the number to do a job it was never built for. Here is what you can do starting tonight, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet correction. First, name your actual number. Not the doubled version fear whispers, not the shrunken version guilt insists on. The honest one. Write it down. Most people have never done this. Most people are, like Balthazar, running without a finish line simply because they've never drawn one. Second, ask yourself where the fear started. Not the current fear about rent or bills, but the old one underneath it. The winter, the year, the moment that taught you not enough feels like danger. You don't have to solve it tonight. You only have to notice it's there, quietly steering, so it stops disguising itself as a spreadsheet problem. Third, before you sleep tonight, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already have. Not as a platitude, as evidence, a working pair of hands, a person who would sit with you at 3 in the morning if you asked them to, a mind still capable after everything of asking honest questions. This is not a consolation prize for people without money. It is the actual ground Balthazar was standing on the whole time, underneath 50 years of ledgers, without ever once looking down. None of these 3 steps will erase the old fear in a single night. Fear that took root in childhood rarely leaves because you asked it politely once, but each time you name your number, notice its origin and count what you already hold. You loosen one thread of the rope that ties safety to the size of an account. Do it enough evenings in a row, and you may find, the way Balthazar eventually did, that the arithmetic simply stops feeling urgent. Picture him now, years later, in the evening light on the terrace of that house with 3 courtyards, the fountain still running, though he no longer checks whether it needs repair before anyone else notices. His daughter's children are nearby. He is not counting anything. Balthazar told his daughter, near the end of his life, that the wealthiest moment he ever knew wasn't the day the second granary opened, or the day they named the bridge after him. It was an ordinary evening, decades after Deverum's visit, when he realized he hadn't thought about his ledgers once since breakfast, and hadn't missed them. You don't need a fortune to feel what he felt. You need only to ask the question he spent 50 years avoiding, and to actually let yourself answer it. How much is enough? Not as a riddle, as a decision. Once you make it, the 3 a.m. arithmetic tends to grow quiet on its own. If this story gave you even a moment of that quiet, there are more waiting for you here. Next time, I'll tell you about a king who traded his crown for one night of real sleep. and what he asked for in return when he woke. Walk gently, hold loosely,